It was the morning of August 25th, 2017. A big storm, Hurricane Harvey, was about to hit Texas. Crystal McDowell sent a quick message to her ex-husband asking if he had enough drinking water for the kids. Then, she got in her black Mercedes and drove toward his house. She had plans that day, showing a house, getting things done, but she never showed up. She never answered her phone, and she never came home. As the rain started to fall harder, Crystal seemed to disappear without a trace. It would take hidden cameras, a child's quiet secret, and a terrible discovery in the woods to finally reveal the truth. This is the real story of Crystal McDowell, and the moment everything changed. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979 in Baytown, Texas. Her early years were anything but easy. Raised by her parents, Pamela and Anthony, Crystal's childhood was marked by instability. Both struggled with addiction and were unable to provide a stable home. Tragically, by the age of 11, Crystal lost both parents to apparent overdoses within months of each other. Following their deaths, she was taken in by her grandmother and later also raised by her uncle Jeff Walters. Despite the hardships, Crystal was known for her radiant smile, striking blue eyes, and a personality that could light up any room. Driven, upbeat, and adventurous, Crystal became a flight attendant, a job that perfectly suited her spirit. For years she traveled the country, experiencing new places and people. At some point during her journey, Crystal met Stephen Wayne McDowell, a man 7 years her senior. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his imposing build, Stephen charmed Crystal. After dating for some time, they married in April 2007. Stephen had a daughter from a previous marriage. He worked as a shipping manager but struggled to maintain steady employment. As a result, Crystal became the primary provider. While she thrived in her career, Stephen remained professionally unstable, creating a noticeable imbalance in the relationship. The couple welcomed 2 children together. Outwardly, their home life seemed harmonious. But behind closed doors, tension grew, particularly around Crystal's frequent travel. Stephen reportedly became increasingly jealous, suspecting her of affairs during her flights, though there was no evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal cherished her family deeply and prioritized stability, especially given her difficult upbringing. In 2016, Crystal made a life-changing decision. After 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she left the skies behind and joined her family's real estate business. This allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of permanence. Her uncle Jeff, proud of her decision, welcomed her as part of the 3rd generation in their real estate legacy. Crystal excelled quickly in her new role. Her charm, professionalism, and dedication made her a rising star in the local housing market. However, privately, she confided in close friends that the career change also served a strategic purpose. She believed that being rooted locally would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, the marriage had reached a breaking point. Crystal filed for divorce, citing years of emotional strain. On March 20th, She called 911 to report that Stephen had made threats against her and their children. Authorities treated the situation as a precaution rather than a criminal matter. At that point, there were no custody agreements in place, meaning Stephen still had the legal right to be with his children. Officers tried to reach him, but their efforts were unsuccessful. A few days later, he returned the children, and Crystal decided not to press charges, choosing instead to focus on de-escalating tensions for the sake of their kids. Those close to Crystal say she was doing everything she could to ensure the divorce remained civil. Her goal was always the well-being of her children. Stephen's adult daughter was disturbed by the events and asked her father why he was acting out. He claimed to be enraged over alleged affairs Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that no one in her circle believed to be true. People familiar with the couple agreed the relationship had been toxic for years. Even Stephen's daughter admitted that while she and Crystal got along wonderfully, the marriage had always been volatile. Despite their differences, the divorce, finalized in June 2017, appeared amicable on the surface. In fact, Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while she worked on renovating her own. However, beneath the appearance of civility, deeper issues lingered. Crystal often asked her family not to mention her plans or outings to Stephen, fearing he would lash out. Even something as innocent as spending time with a friend could trigger him. Although legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept reality. His social media activity revealed a disturbing pattern. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile photo to an image of a tombstone, then to one of Santa Muerte, before switching back to a picture of him and Crystal. His posts painted the picture of a happy, intact family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to support Stephen emotionally, checking in with him regularly. He assured her he was coming to terms with the separation and trying to get his life back on track. But his actions told a different story. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted about bringing Crystal coffee in bed and pampering her, as if their relationship was still intact. In a final attempt to maintain a peaceful co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a cruise with Stephen and the kids, but the closeness only blurred boundaries further. Then, in August 2017, something changed. Crystal, now 37, met Paul, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charismatic, driven, and shared Crystal's love for travel and adventure. Their bond was instant, and for the first time in a long while, Crystal felt genuinely happy. Though she told her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it private until she found the right moment to share it with Stephen. Despite being legally divorced, she still feared his reaction. That fear didn't stop her from publicly expressing her joy. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never been this happy and that her heart was full of a joy she never thought possible. "God is so good," she wrote. 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey loomed. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had stocked up on clean water for the kids and informed him she was heading to his house to shelter with them. She planned to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras captured the final known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels and holding her phone as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's uncle Jeff became concerned. They worked closely in the real estate business and spoke regularly. He tried calling her multiple times to inform her that the showing had been canceled due to the storm. When she didn't respond, Jeff reached out to Stephen, who replied with a suspicious text reportedly sent from Crystal's phone at 9:30 a.m. saying she planned to pick up the kids and head to Dallas. Jeff immediately grew suspicious. Crystal never changed plans without letting him know, and her phone was her lifeline. Work, appointments, everything was managed through it. Something didn't add up. Fearing the worst, he contacted the police to report her missing before noon that same day. On August 26th, as floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and two family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house for over a week, but his daughter told Jeff otherwise. She had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy visited Stephen's home for a welfare check. When authorities entered Stephen McDowell's home, they found not only Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, but also her purse and handbag, clear signs she had recently been there. For her Uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was undeniable. Stephen was involved in her disappearance. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Hurricane Harvey had devastated the region. Many law enforcement officers, first responders, and even district officials were dealing with flooded homes and emergency rescues. As a result, the investigation stalled before it could even begin. Desperate for answers, Jeff turned to the media, hoping to raise awareness and generate leads. But his efforts were drowned out, literally, by round-the-clock storm coverage. With days passing and no progress, he hired a private investigator, frustrated by the silence from local authorities. This move sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney strongly objected to an outside investigator entering Crystal's home, arguing that critical evidence could be compromised or destroyed. Tensions between the McDowell family, law enforcement, and even local media in Houston escalated. Refusing to back down, Jeff and Crystal's new partner, Paul, teamed up to raise a $15,000 reward for any credible information. They launched a social media campaign that finally drew public attention. But in the eyes of investigators, suspicion fell not only on Stephen, but also on Jeff and Paul. Despite Jeff's relentless search for Crystal, law enforcement treated him with skepticism. Whispers about his private life, namely his same-sex relationships, circulated in the conservative town of Baytown. Some believed those biases colored the way authorities viewed his involvement. The local police commander even dismissed Jeff's concerns in a national broadcast, calling him overly emotional and an obstacle to the case. Paul Hargrave wasn't spared either. After submitting to a polygraph with inconclusive results, his credibility was questioned. He worsened things in the investigators' eyes by sending surveillance footage from his home to news stations instead of turning it over directly to law enforcement. Paul defended his actions, saying he tried to provide the videos to the sheriff's office but felt ignored, so he took his case to the public to clear his name. And then there was Stephen. Despite his emotionally manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal ever left him, he was seen by investigators as polite, helpful, and cooperative. While family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and marked by control, authorities didn't view Stephen as a potential threat or a man seeking revenge over the divorce. That all began to change on Tuesday, August 29th. As the floodwaters receded, a family friend spotted Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a rundown motel, an area flagged during the online campaign. The car doors were unlocked, and the keys sat in the console. Investigators believed it had been staged for theft, but due to the storm's impact, the flooded lot had made the car inaccessible. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she vanished. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He didn't buy gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car remained untouched. Even more chilling, other surveillance captured a hooded figure, matching Stephen's build, riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The clues were adding up, and for the first time, all eyes turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband, but as a potential suspect in a case that had stayed quiet for far too long. The investigation took a dramatic turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart located just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was found showed a man resembling Stephen McDowell purchasing a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid in cash, and the timing aligned perfectly with the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this damning evidence, Stephen denied any involvement in Crystal's disappearance. Authorities, citing a lack of direct proof, allowed him to return home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Jeff, her uncle, reminded the district attorney that Crystal had previously filed a report stating Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she ever left him. To Jeff, the man's mental and emotional instability was undeniable. It wasn't until September 8th, nearly 2 weeks after she vanished, that the district attorney finally intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. Yet even then, Stephen dictated the terms. He asked to return home for one final night, to put things in order, and promised to confess the next morning. Jeff and other loved ones were furious. They believed this unsupervised time could give Stephen an opportunity to take his own life and escape justice. But on September 9th, 2017, Stephen kept his word. He returned to the station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal informed him she was taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on an upcoming family trip, and not him. She had just returned from spending time with Paul, which enraged Stephen. As their children slept upstairs, he attacked her from behind and strangled her to death. After the murder, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and before sunrise, drove to a wooded area near his home where he disposed of her remains. Even with the confession, Stephen refused to disclose the location of the body unless prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Given the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities feared the body would be impossible to locate without his help. They agreed to the deal. Later that day, Stephen led authorities to a remote, overgrown area. Crystal's remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, then 44, was charged with first-degree murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which he was unable to pay. Beyond the jealousy and rage, the case revealed a more sobering truth. Without Crystal, Stephen had no means of financial support for himself or his children. Justice, however, moved slowly. The trial didn't begin until June 2019. During that time, Stephen showed no remorse. In court, he attempted to portray himself as a broken man, claiming he acted in a sudden fit of passion, a legal strategy in Texas that, if accepted, could drastically reduce his sentence. He even alleged that Crystal's death resulted from a consensual encounter gone wrong. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative, emphasizing the long-standing emotional abuse and control he had exerted throughout their relationship. Stephen's legal team tried to smear Crystal's reputation, introducing unverified texts and claims of infidelity. But those closest to her stood firm. They painted a very different picture. Crystal was vibrant, caring, and deeply committed to her children. They testified about the dysfunction and manipulation she endured for years. One of the most heartbreaking moments during the trial came when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand and shared something devastating. In December 2017, Maui, then just 5 years old, confided in Mandy that she was ready to reveal her secret. Mandy had no idea what to expect. Gently encouraging the girl to speak, she listened in shock as Maui described waking up the morning her mother vanished. She recalled hearing her parents fighting. She wandered past the bathroom and into the bedroom. There, she saw Stephen push Crystal onto the bed and place his hands over her nose and mouth. Maui stood at the edge of the bed as her mother looked at her, until her eyes stopped moving. Then Stephen turned to his daughter, told her to go upstairs, and warned her never to speak about what she saw. Mandy immediately alerted authorities. Maui was placed into trauma counseling, but the emotional wounds ran deep. Another key witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. She recalled helping Crystal move out of the home when tensions with Stephen became unbearable, and then helping her move back in when Stephen threatened to end his life if she didn't return. Cherry testified that after the divorce, Stephen continued to manipulate Crystal emotionally, even starving himself to make her feel responsible for his well-being. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's home. He was pacing nervously, trembling, and crying. Maui told them she had seen her mom the day before, then pointed to a black dress in a closet and said, "The bad spirits took her." The scene was chilling. Melissa and Jeff immediately called the police from outside the home, begging them to remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their pleas were ignored. Melissa also testified about the family cruise Stephen had proposed, a last-ditch effort to stage a peaceful goodbye. Crystal reluctantly agreed, but made it clear, no threats, no manipulation, no harm. As the trip neared, another argument, this time over money, convinced her to cancel. She realized Stephen wasn't trying to say goodbye. He wanted to win her back. Then came one of the most damning testimonies. An inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen revealed that Stephen had confessed in detail to killing Crystal. The motive? A text message from another man. The inmate recalled Stephen saying he used zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after she died, a detail only the forensic team had previously confirmed. Texas Department of Public Safety officials confirmed other pieces of Stephen's confession. He told them Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They fought. She told him she never truly loved him and that he needed to move on. In a rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial ended swiftly. In just 3.5 hours, the jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder. On September 10, 2019, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He must serve at least 25 before being eligible for parole, making his potential release date 2042. Crystal's family was devastated by what they saw as a lenient sentence. Her Uncle Jeff shouted in court that Stephen deserved worse. Others were frustrated, believing a life sentence or the death penalty should have been on the table. But those options had been taken off due to the deal Stephen struck in exchange for revealing where he had hidden Crystal's body. The family's biggest concern, however, wasn't the length of the sentence. It was the emotional toll on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, Maui and Madden had suffered an unimaginable loss. Crystal had always centered her life around them, and now they were left navigating trauma most adults couldn't bear. By 2020, Mandy Avalos, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was taking steps to adopt them legally. Some sources describe Mandy as Crystal's childhood best friend, while others claimed they had once been romantic partners. Regardless of their past, Mandy remained Crystal's most trusted person, and her devotion to the children was unwavering. Now that you've heard the full story, we want to know your thoughts. Do you think Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Share your opinion in the comments. We're reading them all. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. It was a cold winter night in Kenton, Massachusetts. Snow covered the streets, and most people were staying warm inside. But inside one small apartment, something wasn't right. Sandra Birchmore, 23 years old and expecting a baby, had been busy planning for the future. Baby clothes were still in their packages, and a checklist for her baby shower sat on the table. But suddenly, she stopped answering calls. She didn't show up for work. Days went by, and no one could reach her. When police arrived to check on her, the apartment was silent. They knocked, no response. As soon as they forced the door open, a terrible smell hit them. What they found inside would leave more questions than answers and reveal a disturbing truth no one expected. Sandra Birchmore entered the world on May 13, 1997, in the quiet town of Stoneham, Massachusetts. Her childhood was shaped by challenges that forced her to grow up quickly. Her mother, Denise, struggled with severe health issues for most of her life, leaving the family in a constant battle against financial strain. Sandra's father was never present. He provided neither emotional nor financial support, making Denise the sole provider. Despite the hardships, Sandra was never alone. Denise leaned on both her longtime partner and her mother, Grace, to help raise her daughter. Grace, in particular, became a steady force in Sandra's life, stepping in as a caregiver whenever Denise's health deteriorated. In a home where survival often took priority over stability, Sandra learned resilience and responsibility at a young age. From an early age, Sandra was drawn to the world of public service. She had a deep respect for authority figures, especially those in uniform, police officers and military personnel. This admiration wasn't random. Many of her maternal relatives had served in law enforcement or the armed forces, which naturally influenced her perspective. Her fascination with police work surfaced when she was just 8 years old, after joining a program called Respect. This initiative encouraged children to develop civic responsibility and communication skills while fostering positive relationships with law enforcement. It was here that Sandra's dream of joining the police force first took shape. Determined to follow this path, she became involved with the Police Explorers program at age 12. This hands-on initiative, founded in the 1970s, provided young people with an introduction to law enforcement, offering training in safety protocols, emergency response, and police procedures. From 2010 to 2016, Sandra dedicated herself to the program, taking every lesson seriously and striving to perfect her skills. Friends and mentors noted her dedication and discipline, recognizing that for Sandra, this wasn't just an extracurricular activity, it was the foundation for her future. But life had other plans. In 2016, when Sandra was 19, tragedy struck. Her mother, Denise, passed away, leaving her devastated. Her aunt, Denise's sister, offered support, but the loss was profound. This period of grief also coincided with the end of her time in the Police Explorers program, a double blow that left her at a crossroads. The career in law enforcement she had once envisioned seemed to slip away as she struggled to regain her footing. After graduating high school, Sandra sought a new direction. She enrolled in college prep courses, intending to pursue a nursing degree. While she shifted her focus, she never truly let go of her admiration for police work and maintained connections with people from the Explorers program. However, the difficulties she had faced from an early age had shaped her in ways she didn't fully realize. The loss of her mother and the lack of a strong paternal figure left her searching for guidance and validation, often from authority figures. This vulnerability would later play a crucial role in her fate. In 2020, seeking a fresh start, Sandra moved to Kenton, a town in Norfolk County, Massachusetts. With a population of about 25,000, Kenton was known for its safe, family-friendly atmosphere, making it an appealing place to settle. She secured a job as a teacher's assistant at Sharon Public School, working closely with students who had special needs. Though this wasn't her ultimate career goal, she saw it as a step toward a better future. Her experience caring for her mother had instilled in her a deep desire to help others, and she hoped to build a career where she could make a difference. Sandra's colleagues saw her as outgoing and friendly, though at times her emotional openness seemed excessive. She often shared personal details with acquaintances, sometimes making others uncomfortable. Despite this, her dedication to her students was evident. She cared deeply and put effort into her role even though she lacked extensive experience. Her warmth and willingness to connect with others made her likable, but it also left her vulnerable to those who might take advantage of her trusting nature. Sandra viewed her time at Sharon Public School as a temporary stop on her way to something bigger. She had plans, dreams of a future filled with purpose. But her eagerness to form connections and her tendency to place trust in others without question would eventually lead her down a dangerous path, one that would have devastating consequences. Sandra Birchmore's path first crossed with Matthew Farwell's in 2010 when she was just 13 years old. At the time, she was an eager participant in the Police Explorers program, an experience that fueled her interest in law enforcement. Matthew, a 27-year-old instructor in the program, quickly became a mentor figure in her life. Initially, their interactions remained within the confines of the program, but as time passed, their communication extended beyond official meetings. By the time Sandra was 15, she began receiving personal messages from Matthew, messages that gradually blurred the lines between mentorship and something far more concerning. As an older, more experienced figure, Matthew carefully cultivated a sense of control over her, using subtle psychological tactics to ensure her dependency. What started as guidance soon shifted into manipulation. Over the years, their relationship took on an increasingly unhealthy dynamic. Matthew's influence over Sandra became more pronounced as he inserted himself into every aspect of her life. He displayed extreme possessiveness, demanding to know her whereabouts at all times, and insisting that she update him on who she was with. His need for control extended beyond words. He eventually used technology to monitor her movements, further tightening his grip on her independence. As his jealousy deepened, so did his volatility. His once affectionate tone would quickly turn hostile, his words laced with veiled threats whenever Sandra attempted to assert herself. Disagreeing with him was not an option. He interpreted any act of defiance as a betrayal. And yet, despite the growing toxicity of their relationship, Sandra remained hopeful that things would improve. She rationalized his behavior, convinced herself that he cared for her, and held onto the belief that the man who once seemed like her protector would not ultimately become her greatest source of fear. By early 2021, Sandra was preparing for a major life change. She was expecting a child. Though life had thrown many hardships her way, she embraced the future with renewed optimism. Her apartment was soon filled with baby items she had carefully picked out, from tiny outfits to essential newborn supplies. Even with financial limitations, she was determined to celebrate the arrival of her baby. She meticulously planned a baby shower, eager to share the milestone with those closest to her. Her excitement was palpable, and those around her noticed how deeply invested she was in becoming a mother. She had even scheduled a newborn photography session, eager to capture the early moments of her child's life. But beneath her outward enthusiasm, there were signs of inner turmoil. Sandra's relationship with Matthew remained a major source of stress. He was still deeply involved in her life, but instead of offering support, he seemed to bring more anxiety than comfort. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Matthew's behavior became more erratic. He visited Sandra's apartment under the guise of helping her prepare for the baby. During one visit, he asked for access to her home, requesting both the key and the door code, claiming it was necessary in case of an emergency. While inside, he seemed particularly focused on her bedroom closet, paying closer attention to the space than seemed natural. Shortly after his visit, Sandra confided in a friend, admitting that Matthew had been acting strangely. Still, she tried to justify his actions, convincing herself that his intentions were rooted in concern. It would be the last time she openly voiced any uncertainty about him. On February 4, 2021, concern grew at Sharon Public School when Sandra failed to show up for work and was unresponsive to calls. A recent snowstorm had caused disruptions in the city, but her absence felt unusual. When several days passed without contact, her co-workers alerted the authorities. Officers were sent to conduct a welfare check at her apartment. When they arrived, they knocked repeatedly and rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. A distinct odor coming from inside raised immediate alarm. Recognizing the unmistakable scent of decomposition, officers forced entry into the apartment. Inside, they found Sandra in her bedroom, hanging from a closet door by a belt. The condition of her body indicated she had been deceased for several days. At first glance, nothing in the scene appeared out of place. The initial police report noted no signs of a struggle. Furniture was undisturbed, and the general disarray in the apartment seemed consistent with her usual living habits. However, when her family was later allowed into the apartment, they noticed details that didn't sit right. A load of freshly washed but still wet laundry was left in the washing machine, suggesting she had been in the middle of her daily routine before her death. On the table, unopened packages of baby essentials sat untouched, having been delivered only days earlier. One of the most unsettling discoveries was a broken necklace found near where she had been found, raising questions about what truly happened in her final moments. According to her family, she wore the necklace constantly, even while sleeping or showering. This discovery cast doubt on the conclusion that she had taken her own life. If she had never willingly removed the necklace, how had it ended up broken near the scene? An even more unsettling inconsistency involves Sandra's phone. She was known to use it throughout the day, rarely ever turning it off. However, records showed that her phone had been powered down an entire day before her death and never turned back on. This raised immediate concerns for her family. It didn't align with her usual behavior, and they suspected it pointed to outside involvement. Determined to uncover the truth, Sandra's loved ones pushed for a more thorough investigation. As more details surfaced, particularly regarding her tumultuous relationship with Matthew Farwell, authorities were forced to reevaluate their initial conclusions. His actions in the days leading up to Sandra's death, including his insistence on gaining access to her apartment and his strange demeanor during his last visit, became critical points of concern. These inconsistencies prompted investigators to dig deeper into what had really happened inside Sandra's home. The last known activities of Sandra Birchmore took place on the evening of February 1, 2021. Surveillance footage showed her returning home from work at around 5 p.m. Shortly afterward, she stepped outside briefly to collect a package containing baby clothes she had ordered. Later, cameras captured her outside once again, brushing snow off her car. At exactly 5:46 p.m., she re-entered her apartment, marking the last time she was seen alive. Later that night, a significant figure appeared on the building's security cameras, Matthew Farwell. At around 9 p.m., he was recorded entering the lobby and heading up to Sandra's floor. He stayed inside her apartment for approximately 30 minutes before leaving. His attire stood out. Dressed in heavy winter clothing with a mask covering his face, he was well prepared for the cold, but the way he concealed his identity seemed deliberate. The following day, Sandra was uncharacteristically absent from work and stopped responding to messages. The circumstances surrounding her death quickly drew the attention of federal investigators, who launched a full review of the case. Their first concern was the initial crime scene assessment, which seemed superficial and had overlooked crucial details. Investigators soon uncovered evidence that contradicted the assumption that Sandra had taken her own life. She had been actively preparing for the arrival of her baby, ordering supplies, planning a baby shower, and even scheduling professional maternity photos. These plans indicated she was looking forward to the future, not preparing to end her life. Further suspicion arose when forensic experts examined the marks on her body. The injuries did not align with what would typically be expected in a case of self-inflicted harm. When investigators analyzed Matthew's phone records, they recovered deleted messages that painted a disturbing picture of long-term manipulation and coercion. It was also confirmed that Sandra had been pregnant with Matthew's child, a revelation that shifted the entire investigation. At the time of her death, she was in her third month of pregnancy. This fact significantly impacted their already strained relationship. Matthew not only denied responsibility for the baby, but also reacted aggressively, applying both psychological and physical pressure on Sandra. Her pregnancy became a source of escalating conflict. At first, Matthew attempted to distance himself from her, avoiding discussions about the baby. However, as time went on and he recognized the potential consequences, he re-established contact. His sudden change in behavior, reaching out after trying to push her away, became another red flag in the investigation following her death. Investigators also uncovered a crucial piece of information. Matthew was married with children. Sandra had always been aware of his family situation, but in late 2020, she learned that his wife was expecting their third child. This news devastated her, and she confided in a friend about how deeply it affected her. In one of her messages, she mentioned considering telling Matthew's wife about their relationship. However, she ultimately never followed through. When Sandra informed Matthew that she was pregnant, his reaction was hostile. He not only questioned whether he was the father, but made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with the baby. As tensions escalated, his behavior became more erratic, and Sandra grew increasingly anxious. She shared with those close to her that she felt overwhelmed by the pressure and threats she was facing. As investigators combed through their exchanges, they found alarming patterns. Matthew had frequently monitored her whereabouts, exhibited extreme jealousy, and sent threatening messages. Matthew Farwell had used his authority not only to manipulate Sandra, but possibly others as well. What began as a case centered around one young woman soon exposed a pattern of misconduct within the Police Explorers program, where Matthew had served as a mentor. A review of program archives revealed multiple cases of inappropriate relationships between instructors and participants. Sandra had joined the program at 13, and her involvement with Matthew had begun when she was only 15, an ethical violation that, given their significant age difference, also crossed serious legal boundaries. However, Sandra's case was far from an isolated incident. A broader inquiry into the Police Explorers program exposed decades of unchecked misconduct. Established in the 1970s, the program had operated with minimal oversight, allowing mentors to exploit their positions of authority without consequences. Investigators found that other officers, including Matthew's brother, William Farwell, and their superior, Robert Devine, were also implicated in inappropriate behavior. Over 200 cases of misconduct spanning decades were uncovered, many of which had never been reported or properly investigated. Further scrutiny revealed that in January 2021, a police officer had received an anonymous tip about potential misconduct involving Matthew. Instead of filing an official report, he privately warned Matthew, giving him the opportunity to cover his tracks. Immediately afterward, Matthew began deleting messages and making calculated efforts to regain Sandra's trust, moves investigators believed were meant to prevent her from coming forward. What exactly happened inside Sandra's apartment that night remains unknown, but forensic evidence allowed investigators to piece together a likely sequence of events. It was suspected that tensions escalated when Sandra once again brought up her pregnancy. She may have been pressing Matthew for acknowledgement or support, something that, if exposed, could have serious consequences for him. The broken necklace found near her body suggested that a struggle had occurred. Investigators theorized that Matthew used force to subdue Sandra. Her phone, which had been turned off shortly after his arrival, may have been deliberately disabled to prevent her from seeking help. These findings shifted the case from one of suspected suicide to a probable homicide. Sandra's death not only led to Matthew Farwell's arrest in 2024, but also exposed systemic failures within regional law enforcement. The Police Explorers program was permanently shut down, but the damage caused by years of unchecked misconduct continued to affect many lives. The case ignited widespread demands for reform, pushing authorities to reevaluate how mentorship programs involving minors were monitored. The investigation into Sandra's death culminated in August 2024, when Matthew Farwell was officially arrested and charged. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence linking him to the events of that night. This included recovered text messages documenting years of coercion and manipulation, security footage proving he was at Sandra's apartment just before she was last seen alive, and forensic analysis indicating that her injuries were inconsistent with self-inflicted harm. The charges against Matthew extended beyond Sandra's death. He also faced multiple counts related to his inappropriate involvement with her while she was underage. Case records showed that he had used his position in the Police Explorers program to groom and control her from a young age, These revelations shattered his claims of innocence, which he continued to maintain even after his arrest. Despite the damning evidence, holding additional suspects accountable proved to be a significant challenge. Investigators had linked Matthew's brother, William Farwell, and their superior, Robert Devine, to instances of misconduct within the program, but formal charges were never filed against them. Many suspected that reluctance within law enforcement agencies to expose deeper, institutional failures played a role in the lack of further prosecutions. As of early 2025, Matthew Farwell's trial was ongoing. Prosecutors argued that Sandra had been forcibly restrained and that her death had been staged to appear as a suicide. Forensic experts testified that key physical indicators, such as specific hemorrhages in the eyes and facial swelling, were missing, reinforcing the theory that she had been overpowered before her body was positioned inside the closet. If convicted, Matthew faced the most severe possible penalty, including a potential capital sentence. Sandra Birchmore's case was no longer just about one woman's tragedy. It became a symbol of systemic failure, exposing deep-rooted issues in law enforcement oversight. Her family, along with activists and advocates, continued to fight for justice, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten and that her case would drive meaningful change. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. The house was quiet, but the fear inside was loud. A family was trapped in a room, holding their breath, hoping the locked door would keep them safe. Then, a gunshot. The lock shattered. Someone fell. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Whoever was inside wasn't in a rush. This wasn't a random break-in. It was planned. By morning, police arrived to find a crime scene that didn't make sense. It looked like a robbery, but nothing was stolen. The signs pointed to one person, but the real question was, who was really in control? As detectives searched for answers, they realized this wasn't just about love, jealousy, or even revenge. Someone had pulled all the strings, and by the time the truth came out, it was more shocking than anyone expected. Nathaniel Huey Jr. was born around 1993 into an environment where crime and violence were the norm. From childhood, Nathaniel exhibited a reckless and defiant nature. School never interested him. He frequently fought with classmates, challenged authority, and ignored academics altogether. His first encounter with law enforcement came in his teenage years when he was caught participating in a robbery. However, due to his age, he avoided severe consequences. It didn't take long for him to realize that a life of crime provided more than just an adrenaline rush. It also offered financial gain. His offenses escalated, and by 2016, he found himself behind bars for assault. A year later, he was arrested again for driving under the influence. But what truly fascinated Nathaniel was weaponry. He amassed a collection of firearms, frequently showcasing them on social media. His online presence was filled with images of handguns, rifles, and ammunition, attracting the attention of law enforcement. Eventually, the courts banned him from possessing firearms, but Nathaniel had no intention of complying. Instead, he turned to the black market, acquiring weapons through illegal means. Despite his criminal record, he attempted to present himself as a legitimate businessman. He launched a private security company, though it operated without proper licensing. Legally, he wasn't even allowed to carry a weapon, yet he flaunted his supposed authority on social media, posting images of himself in tactical gear, heavily armed. On the other side of the story was Ermelinda Palomo, born on February 3, 1973. By the time she met Nathaniel, she was a fiercely independent woman, a mother of 5, and already a grandmother. Her upbringing had been relatively stable, though her personal life had been filled with struggles. She had married young, but the relationship ended, leaving her to raise her children alone. Determined to provide for them, she worked multiple jobs, balancing the responsibilities of both a mother and a grandmother. She was strict with her family, earning both respect and occasional resentment. When she crossed paths with Nathaniel, those around her struggled to understand the connection. He was 20 years younger, had a volatile history, and embodied the kind of chaos she had spent her life avoiding. Some claim they met through mutual friends, but regardless of how it happened, their relationship progressed quickly. At first, Ermelinda dismissed him, but his confidence, persistence, and dangerous charm pulled her in. For Nathaniel, she was a source of stability, someone who offered him a sense of security he had never known. For her, it was something new, an experience that gave her the illusion of control over a man who lived recklessly. Their bond was unconventional, an attraction built on stark differences. Before long, they moved in together, and Ermelinda's children and grandchildren shared the same crowded space. Yet, their home was far from harmonious. Nathaniel's obsession with weapons never faded. Despite legal restrictions, he continued to acquire and display firearms, making under-the-table deals and exploiting legal loopholes. Guns were more than a collection to him. They were an extension of his identity. He carried a weapon at all times, even inside the house, often dismantling and cleaning his firearms at the kitchen table. Ermelinda initially overlooked this behavior. She cared more about the money he brought in than the legality of his business. But over time, she noticed that his interests weren't just financial. Nathaniel was unpredictable. His temper flared over the smallest inconveniences, a misplaced word, an unwelcome glance. He could go from seething anger to eerie calm in seconds, as if nothing had happened. The first person to voice concern was Christina, one of Ermelinda's daughters. Unlike others who ignored the warning signs, she saw Nathaniel for what he was: dangerous. She watched how he spoke about violence, how he carried himself with arrogance, how he refused to be contradicted. But what frightened her most was how easily he could lose control. By 2021, Nathaniel and Ermelinda had lived together for 6 years. Outwardly, things seemed stable, but the foundation of their relationship had long since crumbled. Nathaniel had never been faithful, but his affairs had now become routine. He used social media to meet new women, engaged in secret conversations, and erased his messages meticulously. He often left late at night, offering vague excuses about work or business meetings. Ermelinda would wake in the middle of the night, only to find him gone. By dawn, he'd return without explanation. Nathaniel never worried about being caught. He assumed Ermelinda either wouldn't find out or wouldn't dare confront him. He believed he held all the power, but he underestimated her. At first, Ermelinda ignored the red flags, but soon, the pattern became impossible to dismiss. The late nights, the hidden messages, his sudden concern with his appearance. It all pointed to something she couldn't ignore. Her suspicions were confirmed the moment she saw a message pop up on his phone. It left no room for doubt. Instead of reacting immediately, Ermelinda decided to gather proof. If Nathaniel thought he was untouchable, he was about to learn otherwise. She started watching him more closely, tracking his movements, paying attention to his habits, even checking his messages when he wasn't looking. Soon, she could tell when he was lying, when he was covering his tracks, when he was slipping away for yet another secret meeting. The more she uncovered, the deeper her anger grew. She saw two paths ahead: leave him and erase him from her life, or make him regret every single choice that led him to this point. And the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She wasn't going to be just another woman he discarded. If she wanted to hurt him, she needed to do it smartly. Instead of an explosive argument, she chose a different tactic. She would make him feel trapped. She would turn his own world against him. The first step was deception. Ermelinda created fake social media accounts, carefully selecting photos, fabricating identities, and crafting believable personas. She studied online scams, learning the tricks used to manipulate and deceive. She learned the language of threats, the hierarchy of underground networks, and the techniques of psychological warfare. But her most valuable weapon was information. She figured out how to track locations, access hidden data, and manipulate the digital world in ways Nathaniel wouldn't see coming. Then she set her plan in motion. The first contact came from a woman who appeared to be deeply interested in Nathaniel. As expected, he took the bait. He responded eagerly, unaware that he was falling into Ermelinda's trap. At first, their messages seemed harmless, nothing more than casual flirtation. But then, she started dropping hints, small details about his life that she shouldn't have known. She let him believe that someone was watching him, keeping track of his movements. Then came the moment that sent his paranoia spiraling, one simple message with his real-time location. Nathaniel was rattled. Ermelinda could see it in his face, in the way he started glancing over his shoulder, double-checking his surroundings. But she was far from finished. The next wave of deception introduced new players. Nathaniel started receiving messages from different people, some threatening, others pretending to offer protection. They reached out from different platforms, different numbers, never following a predictable pattern. Some demanded money, others warned him to stay away from certain places. A few hinted that he was already too deep into something far bigger than himself. None of it made sense to him, but that was the point. His behavior changed almost overnight. He became restless, anxious. He avoided answering unknown calls, constantly checked his surroundings, and even asked Ermelinda to drive him places just to make sure he wasn't being followed. He changed his passwords, deleted messages, anything to shake off the invisible threat he couldn't understand. But the more he tried to escape it, the deeper he fell into Ermelinda's trap. She watched with satisfaction as paranoia took hold of him. What he didn't realize was that the real threat was living under the same roof. Then, in May 2023, someone else entered the picture. Zoraida. She was one of Nathaniel's co-workers, a woman whose life was already tangled in its own web of secrets. Married with 2 children, Zoraida wasn't content in her home life. Infidelity wasn't new to her. She had strayed before and didn't feel guilty about it. To her, personal happiness was more important than loyalty. Nathaniel saw her as an escape, something fresh and exciting. His relationship with Ermelinda was not working, and Zoraida gave him the thrill he craved. It started with stolen glances, then hushed conversations, and soon they were wrapped up in something neither of them cared to stop. Ermelinda had been monitoring Nathaniel long enough to notice when his behavior changed. At first she thought Zoraida was just another fleeting affair, but then she saw the messages. They weren't just flirting. They were making promises. Nathaniel told Zoraida he loved her, that he wanted a future with her. Zoraida said the same. They fantasized about running away together, creating a new life, one without Ermelinda. Reading those words, Ermelinda felt something she hadn't before. This wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation. She had spent months making him believe he was under attack. And yet, despite all of it, he was still out there, chasing after another woman, living his life as if none of her efforts had mattered. Now, she needed to destroy him. She intensified the psychological torment, introducing even more terrifying figures into Nathaniel's world. He was no longer just being watched, he was being hunted. Nathaniel had been through too much to be afraid anymore. He had survived the worst of it, or so he believed. The only thing that mattered to him anymore was Zoraida. Walking away from her wasn't an option. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just covering up an affair, he was fighting for it. Ermelinda saw the shift in him. If she couldn't break Nathaniel directly, she would destroy Zoraida instead. Her first move was to shake the foundation of Zoraida's home. Using her network of fabricated accounts, she reached out to Zoraida's husband, Alberto. At first, she planted subtle doubts, anonymous messages hinting at betrayal. She even attached photos of Zoraida and Nathaniel together, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. But Alberto wasn't easily provoked. He brushed off the warnings, unwilling to believe his wife could betray him so brazenly. That was when Ermelinda escalated her tactics. The next wave of messages wasn't just about infidelity, it was about danger. This time, the threats were direct. Letters arrived at their home, unsigned but clear. If he didn't take action, his family would suffer. Alberto started watching Zoraida more closely. The unease inside their home was exactly what Ermelinda had planned for. Yet, Nathaniel still wouldn't let go. Even as paranoia crept into his life, he clung to Zoraida like she was his last lifeline. Now, Linda made him believe that Zoraida was the one feeding the people who were spying on him with information. She carefully pieced together a story so convincing that even he had to question what was real. Using her fake accounts, she sent messages from fabricated informants, each one hinting at the same thing. Zoraida wasn't just some woman he had fallen for. She was working against him. She was the reason the threats kept coming. The paranoia finally consumed him. Nathaniel confronted Ermelinda with his suspicions, and she played her role perfectly. She acted hesitant at first, then reluctantly admitted that she too had been warned about Zoraida. Nathaniel couldn't ignore it anymore. The only way to survive was to act. Then came the final test of loyalty. Ermelinda let him believe that his so-called enemies were watching his every move, and they needed proof that he wasn't compromised. There was only one way to prove he wasn't a traitor. The choice was his. By the time Nathaniel made his decision, there was no hesitation left in him. There was no fear, no regret, only a cold, calculated determination to do what had to be done. The planning began immediately. Nathaniel approached the situation like a mission. He studied Zoraida's habits, tracking her schedule and pinpointing when she was most vulnerable. He took note of when Alberto was home, when the children were asleep, when the house would be easiest to enter. He mapped out possible escape routes, watching for surveillance cameras, memorizing the neighborhood's layout. At the same time, he prepared his supplies. He already had a stockpile of weapons, but he gathered other tools, clothing to blend into the night, gloves to avoid leaving prints, tape, a flashlight. He and Ermelinda shopped together, selecting items carefully, making sure no one would suspect a thing. Ermelinda stayed in the background, never directly involved, but always guiding him in the right direction. By the time everything was in place, Nathaniel had stopped thinking about consequences. The night arrived. Ermelinda remained eerily calm as she drove toward Zoraida's house. She acted like it was just another night, even asking Nathaniel why he needed to go there, though she already knew the answer. He didn't respond. He didn't care what she thought anymore. All that mattered was the task ahead. When they reached the house, Ermelinda stayed in the car while Nathaniel stepped out. The front door was locked, just as he expected. He moved silently around the side of the house, found a window, and shattered the glass. The noise jolted Alberto awake. He sat up, listening. Then, he got out of bed and moved cautiously toward the sound. Nathaniel was already inside. The moment Alberto turned the corner, Nathaniel fired, but his aim was off. The bullet missed. Realizing instantly that this wasn't just a break-in, Alberto turned and ran, sprinting toward the hallway, desperate to reach his family's room before the intruder could. But Nathaniel was faster. The gunshots echoed through the house. Alberto collapsed before he could reach the door. For a few seconds, everything was silent. The first gunshot shattered the silence, sending Zoraida into a panic. Without thinking, she bolted toward the bedroom, dragging her children with her, slamming the door shut, and locking it. Nathaniel was inside the house. She didn't know how many others were with him. She only knew she had to keep her family safe. Nathaniel reached the door moments later, slamming his shoulder against it, trying to force it open. It held firm. Frustrated, he took a step back, raised his gun, and fired at the lock. The bullet tore through the wood. On the other side, Zoraida gasped as the impact struck her. Her body stiffened, then she slumped forward. The door swung open. The children clung to each other, eyes wide with terror. The last sounds the neighbors heard were short, muffled gunshots. It was over in minutes. Nathaniel surveyed the scene, his breath steadying. Then he moved methodically, overturning furniture, pulling drawers open, scattering valuables onto the floor, staging the crime to look like a botched robbery. When he was done, he stepped over the bodies and walked back out into the night. Ermelinda was waiting in the car. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't have to. Without a word, they drove away, leaving chaos behind. The gunfire had woken the neighborhood. A few minutes passed before someone worked up the courage to dial 911. Within minutes, sirens filled the street. Officers arrived to find shattered glass, a broken door, and the unmistakable signs of forced entry. Inside, the bodies told a story far more sinister than a robbery gone wrong. Nathaniel had made mistakes, sloppy ones. Nothing valuable had been taken. The scattered belongings were just a weak attempt at deception. It was clear that this wasn't about theft. This was targeted, intentional. By sunrise, detectives were already tracing the crime back to the one person with a motive, Nathaniel Huey. Everyone at Zoraida's workplace knew about their affair. They hadn't exactly been discreet. The deeper detectives dug, the worse it got for Nathaniel. His past was riddled with crimes, assaults, illegal dealings, an arsenal of weapons. While police worked to gather evidence, Ermelinda kept playing her role. She continued messaging Nathaniel, still hiding behind the identities she had created. She reassured him that everything was under control, that the mafia was looking out for him, that as long as he followed instructions, he would remain safe. He believed her. But the investigation was moving faster than Ermelinda had expected. They combed through Nathaniel's recent activity, dissecting every call, every email, every text. One detail stood out. Over the past few months, he had been bombarded with anonymous threats, warnings of danger, claims that he was being hunted. Yet every single one of those messages had come from recently created accounts. If this was a true mafia operation, why did the evidence point solely to Nathaniel? The deeper they looked, the more the threats appeared staged, as if someone had been crafting a false reality just for him. That was the moment the investigation shifted. Nathaniel, meanwhile, was spiraling. He knew the police were closing in. He started noticing unmarked cars following him, strangers watching him too closely. He convinced himself that the mafia was still out there, waiting for him to make a mistake. He believed they would protect him. Desperate, he reached out to the only person he thought he could trust, his mother. He begged her for help, told her he was being accused of something terrible, that he needed to disappear. She refused to help him. Nathaniel had nowhere left to run. For a few days he managed to stay hidden, but security cameras eventually caught him in a grocery store. A manhunt began. Patrol cars swarmed the area, but by the time officers arrived, Nathaniel and Ermelinda had already slipped onto the highway. The chase was on. For miles, police followed, sirens blaring, but Nathaniel had no intention of stopping. He gripped the wheel, pushing the car faster, weaving through traffic, desperate to escape. She had orchestrated every move leading up to this moment, and now she was watching it all unfold exactly as she had planned. Up ahead, traffic thickened. Nathaniel tried to swerve around a truck, but his grip slipped. The tires screeched against the pavement. The car spun out of control, smashing into the guardrail, flipping multiple times before coming to a violent stop. Officers surrounded the wreckage, weapons drawn. Nathaniel was slumped in the driver's seat, a gun in his hand. Ermelinda was beside him, motionless. At some point in those final moments, he had turned the weapon on her, and then on himself. Investigators combed through the wreckage, trying to piece together what had happened in that car. Had he figured it out? The case didn't end there. Detectives turned their focus to Ermelinda's devices. Buried within her files were thousands of messages, chat logs, and notes detailing her manipulation of Nathaniel. Dozens of fake accounts, meticulously created and controlled. She had built this from the ground up. She had studied how to break a person's mind, how to weave fear so tightly around them that they would do anything to escape it. And it had worked. Nathaniel had never been hunted. There had never been a mafia. The real enemy had been sitting beside him the whole time. In the end, the case was closed. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Had Nathaniel figured it out before he pulled the trigger? Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.